Welcome to Story Talks, where we discuss the practices that engage, motivate, develop, retain, and attract people to businesses. We'll give you principles and tools based on real-world stories to leverage listening and storytelling to become a better leader and management professional. Story Talks is produced by Narativ, a company that focuses on personal storytelling for business.
Welcome to Leadership Story Talks. In this podcast, myself, Jerome Deroy, and my co-host, Julienne Ryan, discuss ways in which we can create more engagement in our lives, especially at work. There are more people who identify as disengaged at work than there are who say they feel engaged. In fact, I think it's something like more than 50%. We come from Narativ, which is a company that focuses on engaging businesses and their audiences through the power of listening and storytelling, employing a seven-step method to do so. Now, we've had a variety of guests on this show since we started exactly a year ago. And, we have been remembering what's been going on the last year, our various guests. And today, we don't have a guest, but you and I wanted to have a conversation because we were remembering that first time that we actually got to meet in person. And so maybe I can ask you, Julienne, what was that like? What were your first impressions? Because I think until then, I'm not even sure I'd had a conversation with you on the phone. Maybe I had.
You did.
That's right. So we did. And what I remember most is the meeting in person. And I'm curious what emerged for you, what you noticed.
Well, I'm going to start a little earlier. I first heard about Narativ. I've seen the book, but I first heard about you on another podcast I was attending, and one of your colleagues was on it. And as soon as she said that you were a Brooklyn-based company, I was like, wait a minute, this is fantastic. So I made an effort to reach out to you, and I started to read. I have the book. Murray's book, ready, earmarked as you can see. And I thought, okay, the philosophy is very in line with how I work, and then reached out to you. We had a pleasant conversation. So it was like, this could be interesting. And then you invited me to schlep out to Brooklyn for where I'm living right now. So all's good. And what I realized too, it's so interesting because as a New Yorker and just as a practitioner, I'm always looking to see behind the scenes about people can have a good brand. They can have a great spiel about how they present themselves. But till you meet them in person, I wanted to see, is the organization or the group walking their talk? So you can hear the New York accent coming out loud and clear there. So coming to Brooklyn was really important. And do you want to ask another question? Do you want me to keep going?
No. So
a little trail.
Yeah.
Leave breadcrumbs.
So if I break it down, I guess the first there's the discovery of a like-minded group of people, and I think that's certainly what was going on for us on our end. Was thinking, we're because I remember at the time we were specifically and always are basically are still always looking for people to collaborate with in this space, and it's pretty rare to find people that match in the way that we did, because the storytelling piece was already there. The piece about dealing with human resources and people dynamics and those interactions and all of the organizational development space. Again, it was sort of that, like, we kept checking the boxes as we were looking at your profile and had that first conversation. So there was an excitement to know that you were coming in person.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so what was then the so then we do meet, and what was it like for you to be in that space? And coming from, because I'm also interested in hearing. We talked about this a few times over the years that we've known each other, but I'm curious from your particular background as well, because you're someone who's very used to being both interviewed and interviewing, right? I mean, you've really kind of looked into the science of all of this, and whether it's conscious or not, but I mean, it's your experience. So I'm curious about that too, like the breaking down of what went down in the room.
Well, I always use the expression, it's like an anthropology experiment to visit people in their natural habitat, to really learn about them. Well, the building you were in was like this big labyrinth. It's Industry City, which was this huge labyrinth of restaurants and venues and offices. So there was like a mythical quality coming up the stairs and finally finding the right office and figuring out where's the door I need to go through. But when I came into this space, I think I've shared this with you, it was peaceful to begin with. So it's like, well, that sets the tone. It did have that edginess sometimes you feel when you come into an organization, when somebody puts the facade on and say, oh, wait, company's here. Let me pretend to be something, or all's well.
Let's everybody get busy.
or look rational behind the scenes. So, and then it was a very welcoming environment. So I think that was a big point. And then the other thing is, because in your book, in your practice, like, we're going to prepare for listening, and we're going to prepare to be focused and intentional. And the bubble over my head all the time is, oh, they're really practicing this in the meeting. They're telling me what was in their head, maybe a call or whatever was going on before you. I was thrilled that I found the room and didn't rustle through tons of traffic on the way out there, and found parking. Always an exciting moment. So it was calm, and it was very respectful of saying, okay, we're going to transition. We're going to pay attention to all the niceties, be hospitable. But I was like, well, they really are walking their talk. And then the way you listen to each other was a big cue. And I thought, okay, there's theory, and then there's theory and practice, which is what I experienced. And then so
well,
take a
I'm
sip
just
of
curious because so that's I just wanted to check in here because first of all, it's really kind of interesting to just hear back, something that happened a couple of years ago, and or more than that now, and just those are all things that are coming back to me in terms of course, now we're remote, and I work from a space that's that is my dedicated office, but it's
from a distant land of New Mexico.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And I'm no longer, the way I work with a team is exactly the way we work now. We don't have that physical office anymore. But when we did, and I remember specifically when we were welcoming people, whether they were clients, whether they were interviewees or interns, whatever it was, for any meeting, even meetings, of our team, we did really think very intentionally about the space. And I remember when we found that particular space at Industry City, we really looked at the layout, and we looked at, what are the colors we're going to use, what are the where is everything going to be positioned and placed, and what's really conducive to listening, basically. And even all the way up until we left, there was always that work, should we maybe create a space in the corner over here where we can have conversations that are a little bit more private, that are going to be more conducive to open listening. Like it's always about that. And so it's really, it brings a smile to my face to hear you reflect that back, that's what you experienced, that you experienced that power of the space and that what we call the dedicated time and space, right, in our book, and also that we checked in with each other around what just happened and what might be construed as an obstacle to listening. So we kind of made sure that we could all be present for one another, even though we didn't know each other that well. But it's such an important practice that we have. So I just wanted to interject that before you continue.
And I'm always scanning environments to see, what artwork do they have? What are the little increment, you had little Buddhas here, in different places. But the other part, you talk about interviewing, and anybody who's gone to an interview can relate to this, particularly me. I'm short-waisted, long legs, short-waisted. The couch you chose, I have to say, it's a pity you had to probably get rid of it and we on the move, because one of the most terrifying things about interviews is that the furniture people pick that are very, voguey, but you're like, I can't get out of it. I can't be graceful. So he's not lying about the intention. It was a very user-friendly space to navigate and listen and not be worried about how am I going to work through all the artwork and everything.
Yeah.
But it was how we start to exchange information. Usually things that I would talk about wouldn't happen until a first and second and third conversation, and where I felt like I was at home, like I had met friends, because we were sharing so much of the same values. I shared some of the stories that triggered my work in story that came out of interviews, where I was using it as a technique to remember candidates' backgrounds and get them to relax. And I used to use my own story, and I used to get reactions from the candidates going, why are you using an example of something failed? Because I was like, if I'm going to ask you, tell me about something failed, I might as well buy you some time and tell you about my worst, some of my bad stories. But what happened, it made a bond, but I didn't understand any of the science till later on. And I went, oh, what I was doing was actually what we recommend doing in any workshop. So I was my own intern, in the pre stage. But to be heard, and you listen. It wasn't like, plus we were speaking the same language, and that's always incredible to everybody who's listening. When you find that like-minded person that really pulls insights out of you, and I think that's the power that we do have this on the phone or the videos together, but that's the power when we do come together in a person. Is those little moments you can have with somebody that just you can be spontaneous. So those were some of the impressions, and then I'll tag my post.
I'm curious about that too. But yeah, the one thing I wanted to maybe just highlight here for our listeners, I'm sure there's people that are listening to us who are in that process of either a career change, or maybe you're starting your career and you're going through that process of interviewing, and maybe some of you are the ones that are doing the interviewing, right? And I think there's something there that you mentioned, which I would love for people to take away from this conversation, is that when you meet that person and you tell the story, right, about your experiences. And I remember that experience. For me, what it did for my listening is that it opened it up, and suddenly it's like, oh, there's an experience that Julienne had that matches up with an experience that I had, and I want to tell her a story now. And so that's what we did, and we were kind of speaking in that storytelling language. And I think for people who are going through that interviewing process, and what that did is that it allowed us to realize what our values were and which of our values connected with each other, as opposed to coming right out of the gate and saying, I'm a listener, I'm a team player, I'm a collaborator, and I care about the planet. Those are my values. I mean, it could be something like that,
and food.
Right? And food, yeah, whatever it is, right?
When's the next meeting? I'm coming back here. This is a great place.
Right, exactly. You're free to have whatever values you want, but that's not how the conversation went. It was more about the stories that showed us what the values were, and we knew kind of naturally that there was that connection. Without the stories, it wouldn't have happened. And so I really encourage people who are listening here to think about the stories behind your values. And if you notice in the interview room that nothing's coming back to you, that you're not getting what we're talking about here, that what we got in the room when we met, then maybe that's not the right place to work in, because that's what happened to me. When not everybody's so lucky to find someone that's like-minded and with the same values.
Well, because I was hurt, the more I listened to what we were sharing and some of the formalities of how you work, I was able to take a better and bigger risk to share. I gave an analogy about what triggered my storytelling work when I met a mentee in a group session, and he had used certain words, and it just stuck into my head, and it really sent me on a learning journey about myself and my work, and it changed the course of what I was doing. So I shared that. I was like, in the first meeting, and I thought, wow, I can't believe I felt so relaxed, so appreciated, and et cetera. So the other part I always guide people to do when we're meeting people, and we're going to meet, it's get out of the left brain for a while. When you leave, figure out what you felt physically, like what your senses were telling you, your gut reaction, because sometimes we're processing intuitive parts of us that don't really filter through there. And that's exactly, I was sitting in my car afterwards in the parking lot. There's a big parking lot. It overlooks, the river. And I was like, did that just happen? Or did I just imagine it, that this was a great meeting and et cetera? But just reflect. I think sometimes we speed to the next one. But again, the power, how that worked. Yes, it was an interview. We both had agendas in a loose way. I wanted to learn values. Is there something there? But because we relaxed and we didn't make it just the traditional situation, action, results interview, it opened up in possibilities. Do you need the first part? Absolutely. You need some framework and things to test and structure. But the other part, the spontaneous part, the relaxed part, that pulls out the human. And I think that is where the opportunity is. And it was amazing. And then we end up, connecting, obviously, and we show up here. So I'm going to turn the tables.
Can I just say
you.
one more thing
Okay,
about that last piece that you said? Because I think it's so great. To me, it's like, and we often make this analogy actually that it's like jazz. When you go to a jazz concert, you feel like, wow, they're just making it up in the spot, and they're just jamming, and they've never. Sometimes if you actually even go to a jam session, you'll see people that just walk up with their guitar, and they start playing incredibly with these three other people.
Absolutely.
And you just think that it's magic, basically. But what's really going on behind the scenes is that these are people who are highly accomplished and have worked their entire lives, and it's their career, and they've learned the notes, they've learned the scales, they've learned everything, right? And they know it like the back of their hand. And so but that's what allows them to go ahead and improvise in the moment. Because, and I use that analogy because what happened in our meeting is that we all came prepared with that situation, action, results, right? And so that's really important. And we know that, and we're also experienced people. And so, we have all that wealth of information, and we prepared with that. And then that's what allowed us in the room. You need another skill, which is to say, now I'm just going to listen, right? Now I know my stuff, I've got it all there, but now I have to connect with this other person. That's my number one priority, is to connect with that person, however I can do that. And the first thing you have to do is to listen, and then you find the stories to tell, and it's a conversation, and all the things that you prepared, they may come up, they may not. But that's in the reflection that you were talking about, right? In the reflection, you can kind of sit and say, okay, I think I said everything I needed to say in order to connect with that person. Maybe there are times when you're going to come out of a situation like that, and you'll think, oh, I wish I had said this other thing too.
Absolutely.
And and now that for the next time you can kind of, but it's so important to have that reflection part that you're talking about, of just like, just a few minutes just to notice. And don't beat yourself up about the things that you might have missed out on, because there's always an opportunity. You can email, you can do different things, and without short of stalking people. But that's so anyway.
Don't
I just wanted to add that. Yeah, because that is the the process, and
it's the leap too, to say, okay, I think this is the moment to share this, and I think this is the right time, and it'll be received the right way. I'm probably not over intellectualizing how it was, but in that few minutes going, go for it, I think is probably the more of the exact words I probably told myself. I used analogies all the time, as you know that from working with me in work. When I've coached interviewing, both on the manager side and also the person who's going through the interview, I always say, what was the experience like? Because if this is the first date, what's the marriage going to be like? So how were you received? How were you treated? What did you walk away? How did they follow up? And those are all small details. And there was a young lady I know that was coaching, and she had a bad experience recently because I think she blew past some of those milestones. She was more aspirational about the job and what she thought it was. She didn't dig enough into her homework about what and truly that relationship was supposed to be about, and it was disappointing, and she had to move on, which is probably a smart move, given what was developing. But to do your homework and listen to the tangibles and the intangibles. When I used to go to interviews, and I would do this when I had lobbies, is also find out how that person was interacting with everybody from the guard to the receptionist now, and do my homework, and vice versa. I'd watch interactions of staff, how they were talking, what was some of the words, what did they look like, did they look healthy, did they look stressed, you find a lot. So I always say, like, and especially in this period of time when we're all heads down, do not do that when you're preparing for a meeting, whether you're doing a business meeting or an interview. Like, scan. That's your time to collect intelligence. So back to you. In the prior sessions, we've learned you started in France, you went to school, always had a passion for film and creativity. Then you went to finance in Hong Kong, and then you decided, that's not for me, even though you kept that hobby and interest on the side. Came to New York, found Murray, and then start to collaborate with him, and his colleague, his co-founder, Paul.
Yeah.
And then it does feel a little bit like a fable, because in your stories you talk about one day they hand you this magic box and said, here's a bunch of stuff, and you open and there's notes and things, and you went, huh, I'm going to make a business out of this. So I'd like to find a little bit more detail. Like, that was a great overview of, I looked in the box and then I did some thinking. I would like to get a little more weeds of what some of that thinking was and how it changed and why the process we do works so well going forward. So that's a long-winded question, but I think
no, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, and it's our 1-year anniversary of the podcast, and now we're going 20 years.
We're going deep. We're going deep.
Exactly. So it's quite an opening. But well, yeah. So yes, I mean, maybe just as a bridge to what we were talking about before as well, because I see some connection there. Just going back to that idea of listening and the space that was created for me without me knowing that this space had been created for me. And I'm talking about the first time that I met Murray, and then the first time that I met Murray with Paul, the two founders of Narativ. It's really very reminiscent of how you experienced your meeting with me and the team in Brooklyn, even though that happened many years later. It's interesting because it was the same sort of intention, I think, that they had, which was very welcoming, and not a lot of talking on their part other than giving me the background that I needed to know, essentially. Knowing that these conversations happened in a very organic way, because I wasn't there to work for Narativ at all. They had founded this company in 2000, and by the time I met Murray, it had been around for 4 years already, 4 or 5 years actually, and the methodology itself had been created even before that, as many of our listeners know, in the mid-1990s during the AIDS epidemic. So the thing itself had been around for a long time. And yet I wasn't there for that. I was there to work with Murray on a film. I was going to be I was his production manager, and at first his intern. And so we really met through that field. And that conversation happened because, Murray at one point said, there's this company that I created with Paul, and I think you should meet with the two of us, and we should tell you about it because you've got this background in business. You've helped me a lot with my film business, and my films are being distributed now thanks to your efforts. And I wonder if there's something there that you might be interested in, and maybe you could help us. Those were his exact words. Maybe you could help us figure out how this is a business, or how this could be a business. And,
so like as a coach, come in as almost like their business coach. They were doing very therapeutic focus, just for everybody who maybe hasn't heard this before, but very therapeutic based coaching circles and support. Yeah. And then taking it to someplace else. So you were coming in from the balcony to look at, what do you have?
Exactly. And in that question, and I asked that question, what do you have? And that's when they gave me this box, this shoe box, that was filled with lots of different things. Yeah. And of course, I realized, not in that moment, but many years later, that anything that's a box, a closed box in a play, in a movie, in a book, you immediately want to know what's in there. And many times, for suspense, no one will open that box for about an hour or so. But you have these kind of very, ominous zoom-ins onto the box. And so that was very much the case for me. I didn't know what was in the box, but I wanted to know. And he said, that's Narativ. That's everything we've collected is in that box. Could you take it home and take your time?
Okay, but you got to explain. They have like multiple degrees and things like, so here's the most sophisticated psychiatrist.
Yeah, PhD,
There-
medical doctor. Yeah.
And it will boil down to a box. I mean, I think that's just a brilliant analogy and so true for most of us. Like, I think we carry an invisible box with us too, of all the stuff we bring from one situation. So go on, sorry.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, we are in the land of metaphor and analogies with these because it's just so great. But this is true. I mean, this is how it happened. I literally had a shoebox in my hands that I brought back to my apartment and opened up and started to read what was in there and just looked at what it was. And at first I was kind of wondering because it didn't make much sense. There was not a lot of order to it. But then I started making order to it. That's kind of how the brain works for me. And I just started to organize it and I started to see patterns basically. But the number one thing that happened is that I was interested because there were lots of stories. In an email, there was a story about how Murray and Paul had met and come together to create this thing called Narativ. And the story was going out to someone at IBM at the time. And then there was, a performance, a script for a performance. So I was reading that. That was all about storytelling in a therapeutic sense, all these different things. And so it was really interesting and very far from my own experiences coming from finance and marketing, basically. And so, so that's how it started. I opened up this box, put everything in order, created a PowerPoint, called it Business Plan for Narativ. And a week later, I was in that room with Murray and Paul, essentially walking them through what this company could be. And, that was back in 2005 or 6. And there was really not much. There were a couple of clients here and there. But there was this very structured methodology and you could follow it. And that's really what resonated with me, is that I could follow it and I could learn how to tell my story through this method. And I thought at that time in my life, for my career, that was really important because I had all these different things going on: film, finance, marketing. How do I bring it all together? So in a very kind of selfish way at first, I was like, this is going to be good for me to work on this, And then of course, thinking back to my days in the corporate world, which at that moment were not that far away, going all the way back to what were the spaces that were created to listen in the companies that I had worked for? Not much at all. And what was the result of that? People not being engaged at work, people leaving, people going to other companies in the same field, bosses thinking that people were leaving because they were getting paid better elsewhere, even though that was not the case. So this was all where it started to fire in my brain in terms of how this could then be applied in the corporate world.
Question. If going back in time, if you had run into a Murray earlier on and he had taught you this process, do you think and you had experienced it in your business group, do you think what do you think would have happened? Would you have stayed, or how would that have helped, or where do you think the value would have been had they come into your group in Hong Kong and done this?
I think it would have changed things. I think it would have accelerated my awareness of, first of all, what I needed, what I wanted. I was, when I went to business school in France and in the European system. I don't know if it's the same all over Europe, but certainly in France, it's not like in the US where you first go to college and then you'll get an MBA and do business school, and so you'll be in your mid-20s, maybe late 20s, 30s by the time you got your MBA. In France, you decide on these things very, very early on, and so you have to decide whether you're going to go to business, law, be a doctor when you're 18, basically. And so for me, I had no idea, and I chose the business path because that's kind of where I came from in my family, and it's what I knew. And so I did that, but I kept this voice, this internal voice at bay of, this isn't really what I want to be doing, the finance thing. There's something else for me, but I just don't know what it is. And I think that, and so by the time I got out of business school, I was 23 years old. And then I went to Hong Kong, I was 24, 25. And that was right at the time when I was started, maybe a year, 2 years into this job. I stayed 5 years. 2 years in is when I started to think, I better pay attention to what else I want to be doing, because I
Mm-hmm.
don't think I can continue like this. So I knew that about myself,
Mm-hmm.
and it had nothing to do with my work environment. But the fact that the work environment didn't allow me to sort of think, how do I fit in this organization? Is there a part of what I'm thinking now about what I need, what I want, what I'm interested in that could actually work within this organization? I had no way of knowing that because no one was asking. There were
Mm-hmm.
no opportunities to do that. There was certainly no training to sort of evolve you in any kind of professional development. And so, yes, I think it would have made a huge difference if someone had come in and said at the time, we want to hear your story, where you come from, what your origins are, how you get your
Mm-hmm.
ideas, what do you find innovative, where is all that coming from? What's the story? And we're going to give you a method to tell that story, so that even if you're super intimidated by the process and you find it very threatening, by the end of the day, you will have actually told a story. You will do that. So it'll increase your
Mm-hmm.
confidence at the same time. All of those things were at zero for me. I had zero perspective of like, what am I going to do with my life? I had zero confidence about how am I going to do it, and can I even do it? So yes, I think it would have made a big difference. Would I have stayed there? Probably not. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it would have accelerated this idea of like, yeah, there's something for me out there. I can do it. And I know what my story is, which gives me greater confidence to go out there and
Correct.
that I need.
So you've hit on a couple of, I took some notes while you were doing so I could remember the points. One of it, when I've used stories in a group and also in much more professional development setting or into, it's looking for clues and paying attention. So having that person to be the sounding board, to looking how your body changed, your energy changed, how you light up, whether it's you're standing across from a desk in an interview or on a couch just having a conversation with someone, where the light comes in when they really get excited about a project, no matter what it is and what they did, and they have some energy. And we're sometimes a little blind to that. We just take it for granted that what we love is what lights everybody else up. The other thing too, you mentioned even at the point when you went in to talk to Murray and Paul and with your magic box, the power of bringing in the other, somebody who has a clear line of sight. And a lot of times the organization knows what it needs to do, or they know what the issues are, but you need that sounding board to step away and help them map it, but also reflect back of what was hiding in plain sight. Because the other thing I'm always telling in a group setting is the best stories are already in the room. When we show up, we are entertaining. We do tell a story or two to collaborate with the group and model it. But the whole process is about stepping away and supporting the confidence to say those sentences of like, my life changed talking to a mentor. My life changed when I asked for feedback from my teams and clients about where did I bring value. So it's that point that somebody's going to dig a little bit more and allow you, give you a tool or a path to be able to frame it. So that's why I like the group, because it is very structured the way you do it. So you use the word container, because if you just said, well, you're going to all hang out for 5 hours and just look at each other, nothing's going to really happen. You might have some good conversations one-to-one, but it's the structure and then the ability to be spontaneous at the same time, that tension. So I think that's great. So you clearly made big shifts, but it's also listening to what's going on in your mind, saying, I know I have gifts and talents, but I'm a little out of sync in this environment. These are not my total people. I need to find my people and my tribe where I feel aligned and like
and all it
invigorated.
takes, thank you for that. I mean, it's a great summary, because yes, that all it takes for someone to open up in the way that I wanted to open up would have been for someone to say, hey, let's have a moment of structured feedback here. For 30 minutes, I'm going to ask you some questions and you're going to respond, and I'll give you some of my observation about yourself, and you can give me observations about me. And then, that's how we progress. That's how we figure out where there's a fit, where there isn't. And because I think that idea, of yes, I knew I had some talents to offer, and I was starting to develop an expertise also in marketing and
Mm-hmm.
finance, you know, despite this not being my passion. I mean, there were lots of things that I was getting really good at. And so, and including managing projects and things like that, which then came
Mm-hmm.
in very handy when I started to work at Narrative. And so, you know, it's not like it's sort of this miserable part of my life at all. You know, and plus I was learning about this amazing culture in Hong Kong and meeting
Yeah,
incredible
I
people.
got
And so many of the conversations that I had, so many of those conversations that you're describing, Jules, in terms of that structure, the container, they were happening outside of work. I
it.
was meeting people that were allowing me to express what I needed to express. And
Mm-hmm.
they were telling me stories about what they were going to do when they were done with this experience that they were having in Hong Kong. Because it was very particular. I don't know if you know this, but coming from France, the reason I went to Hong Kong was that there was this program
Mm-hmm.
that gave government subsidies to come to French companies that had subsidiaries in Hong Kong and elsewhere in the world, um, to hire French people out of college, out of business school. And they would help them do that, to sort of incentivize them to do that, to give them experience essentially. So I was part of one of those programs
Wow.
and so I signed up for, I think it was 16 months. And so as a result, there were lots of other French people in Hong Kong working for other French companies. And it's through conversations with them, and two in particular, you know, two of them were like, oh, I'm just doing this because I want to get the experience of living in Asia and all that, and
Mm-hmm.
get something on my resume. But I know that after this, I'm going to be going out to do something creative. And one of them was actually going to work in film. He had a whole plan. And so he and I discussed this for hours. And I was like, and finally I said, do you think there's something in my background that might work for this kind of plan too? And he said, oh, well, yeah, I think you should probably be in distribution and this, and, you know, this aspect of, he knew so much about it and had studied about it. So then I could do my own studying. I could figure out,
Mm-hmm.
okay, where would this work? And that's how I ended up in New York eventually, you know, because I had a good idea of how I could apply what I had learned throughout my education and my career at this point, that I could then translate into a career in film potentially. So it didn't sort of come out of you know, this was a very rich experience that I had.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that yes, things would have been very accelerated. That whole process, I don't think I would have been there for 5 years, probably less than that, you know. And
But had you not listened to yourself and said, oh, I'm going to just tough it, this is a great gig and stay here for 10 years, then you would have seen a different energy. So this was a great way to explore, and once in a lifetime opportunity, also being outside of your culture that you were familiar with. So there was a lot of things that really helped the process. And then being curious,
yes,
you know, and being open to listening, was probably your best tool, even then, to others, and saying, not sure, but let me
yes,
go travel and see what other people are thinking and
yeah,
doing.
because I was also listening to other people who were saying, are you kidding? This is a great, you should stay here for 10 years.
Mm.
You should go back to their headquarters in Paris, and you should, you know, go up that corporate ladder, so to speak, and you know, you'll have a great career, and it's so great, and you'll keep traveling and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
So that I had both sides, you know, coming
Mm-hmm.
in, but I think that's important to hear all those sides, and to
Mm-hmm.
keep those into your consciousness, and then you sort of latch on. What are the stories that were told to you that resonate the most at the end of the day, you know, and what do you think, what's your gut telling you at that point, you know? So
The old question of what would you do, no matter what, if you could, you know, just without the price attached to it.
yeah,
So that's great. So we're our own students along the way. So I think that's the joy of it. And also seeing it in the room when we were working either one-to-one or in a group, and seeing interactions happen, and having the group do exactly what you said, colleagues were talking to and helped you get inspiration. Part of the story method, as we've said in the past, is we reflect back when we're telling the stories, like what came to mind when you said, like, you were brave, you were ingenious, you took a risk. So that kind of feedback starts to help somebody pay attention to themselves. And I think the more grounded they can be about that, the more apt, I'm being very optimistic here, the more apt they feel heard. They may take some time to, you know, hear others, knowing they've been seen, heard, and respected. So that's kind of my motto in a lot of things.
I love it. I love it. I think this is there's probably going to be a part 2 to this conversation.
Oh my goodness, great.
And that's why we have a whole it's our podcast. So
I know we can do what we want.
So yeah.
So, that's great. So thank you for humoring me. I was like, we got another first to talk about. But the parking lot, in my mind's eye, I can see the parking because HSS is a hospital special service, has their outpatient something in the building. And I'm like looking at the building, looking at this parking lot. It's like totally, it looks like a movie set. Like it should be filming some crazy movie in this parking lot. Yeah. And thinking that just happened. And that could be something important to do, and trust your instincts and, look for like-minded people. I mean, not saying you find eclectic groups of people to work with, but when you find that synergy, it's such an important thing. So I'm totally appreciative. So I'm glad we got to share it in a public setting.
Me too. Thanks for suggesting this. It's great to remember that. And what you just said, I think it also is the benefit of having the mind of a storyteller like you do and like I do and so many people that we work with do and all our clients now do. That's the goal. You remember certain moments and that's going to be an important moment and that potentially that's going to be a turning point in your story. I think the ability to recognize that, to have that awareness is really important, because the more you can share those important moments with others, the more they're going to open up to you. So that's also part of our process. So, well, great. I'm delighted that we had this conversation, and I hope that our listeners took a lot out of it. We're certainly going to create lots of notes around it.
Yes, and everything we said is true.
Yes, everything we said is true. This is not based on a true story. It is a true story. So thank you all for listening. As always, you can visit our website, narativ.com, for information on all of the things literally that Jules and I talked about today around listening, around finding your story, crafting your story, presenting your story, things that are going to engage your audiences really like nothing else has before. We're always ready to listen to you, so please contact us through the website, email us, and we will be happy to listen to what you have to say and help you tell your story. So Jules, thank you so much.
Thank you. And, I'm looking forward to hearing more backstories when we work with folks too. That's the most exciting part, to see that revealed. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. And we'll see you next time.
For more information on the narrative listening and storytelling method and how it can help your business, go to narativ.com.